So we go live. So we are live. Hi everyone, and welcome to this live Q&A with Godot core contributors. So we are happy to be there and have a chat with all of you and see, answer your questions, talk about what we've been working on lately in the community. And yeah, I suggest we can start with a quick roundup to just have all of the present contributors just maybe remind who they are and talk briefly about what they've been working on lately. And then for the questions, you can ask questions in the chat on YouTube, and please prefix your questions with exclamation mark question. I'll give an example like this. So this, if you were asked questions with exclamation mark question, then it will be filtered in a tool that we made so that we can see them easily and hopefully not miss your questions. So let's start maybe with, I'll take it in the order I see you. So Gilles, can you tell us about what you've been working on?
So lately I still have been working on the tiles editor, the tiles editor rework. So I'm getting pretty close to be done on that. So you might have seen the progress report. We do usually like every 2 months. I do a progress report on the tile editor, so you can have a look to where I'm at now. So a lot of things has been implemented, like support for scene-based tile, and well, there's a ton of things. I don't remember exactly what I did in the last month, but I'm also going to work on tile map layers. Sorry, I still have some things to do. Animated tiles we discussed, so that's basically all I'm working on for now. And yeah, I hope I should be done soon.
Nice. What about you, Hugo?
So this month I'll be working mainly on improving editor usability, especially in 3D. Since we now have a lot of new fancy rendering features, it's time to make the editor as usable as possible. So I've been working on that a lot, making sure you can do things with as few clicks as possible and quickly so that power users can be more productive. And besides that, I've also been working, not only I was making my GodotCon video about decals, which you can check out on YouTube in the GodotCon video, but also side stuff and eventually deploying what I've done about the documentation changes.
Nice. George?
Hello. So lately I've been working on the new extension systems with something that Juan came up to replace GDNative, and it has an advantage that it's more like the modules, and it also has a very small API, which GDNative has a lot of functions. This new extension has only a few functions, and they're probably not going to change it, so there is less of a chance of breaking compatibility as well. And I'm working on the C++ bindings for this system, so you can use a code very similar to how you do a module, but instead you compile like a shared library that you can share compiled versions, and you don't have to recompile Godot. Like every time you change, you just compile your plugin. That's the main advantage of GDNative. So I'm working on the C++ bindings, and it's gonna take me a while to get it done, but it's going well. So essentially, everything you do in GDNative, everything you can do on module, you can do in GDNative and be very, very similar, very less restrictive and more powerful as well. So that's essentially what I'm working on lately.
Nice. Bastian, what have you been up to? We cannot hear you. but you're not muted. So let's move to Fabio, and while you figure out why the mic is not working.
Yeah. So hello everyone. If you don't know, I've been working in the past on HTML5 platform, and after working for more than a year on it, and I think now reached a much better situation than it was before. And I recently added the features like automatic progressive web app export and the new JavaScript interface to integrate Godot HTML5 export with the external website or JavaScript SDKs and so on. I finally moved back to my original topic, which was networking and multiplayer. I've been doing some more work on refactoring the RPC system and adding some new features to it. Recently, like in the last few weeks, I've been working on finally releasing a new version of the WebRTC plugin for the native platforms, which now supports almost every platform Godot support. We are still working on getting an OS X 64 ARM 64 for M1 Apple build, but basically every other platform is supported, including iOS, Android, and x64 OS X. So that's mostly it, and I have a new release planned for the WebRTC plugin in the coming week, just as a quick update on the previous one. And then I have to finish my work on the RPC system. There's going to be quite some new features and things to be implemented, so it's going to be great.
Nice. So can we hear you now, Bastian? No, still not, I think. No, no sound. Joan? Yeah, Joan, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been working on, I spent quite a lot of time on visibility dependencies, which is similar to a high level of detail system. So you can have meshes that replace a bunch of other meshes and imposters eventually. And after that, I was working on gizmos, improvements on the 3D gizmos. So the idea is you will be able to have handles like we have right now with gizmos, but they are transformed, so you can move them and scale them like you will move and scale a 3D node. So that would be useful for the idea is to have skeletons, Path 3D, and maybe some other nodes will for sure benefit from that. And yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Nice. Juan?
Hi everyone. So I was mostly working on optimizations right now. Most of the rendering work is done for Godot for alpha. So been mostly working optimizations, fixing bugs and cleaning out everything. So when you try, it doesn't spill a lot of errors, nothing works and that kind of things. And that's it mostly.
Do we have sound this time?
Yes, you have sound. No video, but we hear you.
I just switched to Chrome from Firefox, so hopefully that'll work. For me, two things that I've
And no audio again.
We lost connection with Australia. You're back.
I'm back. That was my connection breaking up again. So yeah, I'm working on the mobile renderer and adding VR support into the mobile renderer. So we now have stereoscopic rendering back again in Godot 4. We have the OpenVR plugin working again, so that's the other thing that I've been working on. And I have been working on the Godot 3 OpenXR release that we did earlier in the week, if I recall correctly. So yeah, that's what's been keeping me busy.
Nice. And for myself, I've been working on all the little things that make the the box tick, like always, a lot of PR reviews. And now I'm focusing trying to update a bit the build system for Godot 3.4 and Godot 4.0, because we will soon have 3.4 beta 1 and 4.0 alpha 1 test builds for starting to play with the new features in the two branches we're working on. So let's start with the Q&A. We already have quite a few queued that I will have a look at and pick some. As a reminder, if you just joined, to ask questions, use the prefix !question, so that helps us filter it in the tool so that we can see the different questions. So I'll start with one from Patreons, which is maybe for Juan. If there are any plans to backport the new decals feature from Godot 4 to Godot 3.
So most likely not, because this relies on quite a lot of things that are Godot 4 specific, mostly the fact that it's only really useful when you use cluster rendering, which is what we do in Godot 4. It can be used without it, but it's not so efficient. Additionally, we rely on some functionality on Godot 4, that is that you can like read a texture both in like sRGB and non-sRGB, so we have like an atlas for a lot of textures, so we can read them like in a single pass, and it's a portable way. So all these kind of things make it very difficult for this to work in Godot 3. So at this point, since we are having so many people asked to port things from Godot 4 to Godot 3, the idea is probably to just make sure we can start working on releasing Godot 4 as soon as possible. So that's a better solution, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a question, which is kind of two questions, I think, a bit open-ended. Maybe we can answer the two parts separately. What measures are being taken to secure a better workplace for Linux and VR developers? For Linux, I can say, I mean, I'm not sure what better workspace means specifically for this platform compared to what we have and other platforms. I would say Linux as a workspace in Godot is already kind of like the best platform, like equal to Windows. Like you have access to all the features. It works very well, and it's well integrated with the system. We still plan to do some work on improving support for stuff like Wayland that we don't support natively yet on Linux. That's something which will be good in the future. And now in Godot 4, we're also struggling a bit with like the multiple window support and how that interfaces with the mess that X11 is. But yeah, we still have like most of the team here is using Linux as their daily driver. So of course, having first-class support for Linux, both as a workspace and an export target is always a priority for us. For VR, I guess, Bastian, you can say something about that.
Yeah, that one is a bit more difficult to answer in the sense that it's not really up to us. On Linux, we currently support both OpenVR and OpenXR as APIs to talk to the hardware. With OpenVR, obviously, we have access to all the devices that are supported through Steam on Linux. However, that's only a handful because many of the hardware developers don't actually write drivers for their VR hardware for Linux. So for instance, for Oculus, there is no runtime on Linux, only on Windows. The other option that currently is available on Linux through OpenXR. Yeah, OpenXR can both work through Steam VR, but it can also work through the open source Monaro project from Calabara. And they support a number of devices through open source drivers, but they are, there's a very big mix of quality because they are all drivers created by, by open source developers who have been basically reverse engineering a lot of the drivers that come from the vendors. That said, as far as Linux is concerned, I think Godot is probably one of the few game engines that actually supports VR on Linux quite well and has been quite well received. So, yeah, the hardware that is supported on Linux is supported by Godot, I would say. The hardware that isn't supported on Linux, we don't have any control over that. That's up to the hardware vendors to start writing drivers for the various architectures. So that's all I can answer on that, I think.
Yeah, that's nice. Thanks. Maybe a question for Kalinu on the import system, because I know you worked on that, which is, will there be options to invert on one end the green channel of normal maps and on the other hand height maps?
Yes, so I already answered this question in chat, but I'll also answer here to make it clear. So a few weeks ago, I implemented a feature in the import doc to invert textures green channel. So you can now convert your normal maps if they have the DirectX format to the OpenGL format, which Godot uses. So for instance, if you download a normal map online, you can convert it directly in Godot, so you don't have to do this in an image editor. And as for inverting heightmaps, in Godot 4, heightmaps are now inverted by default, so you don't have to invert your texture anymore. So we remove the option to invert all channels since it's not really useful anymore. And if you really need it, you can still flip the heightmap in the standard material 3D settings, which are now added in Godot 4. So it's no problem, you can still convert your textures from Godot 3 to Godot 4 without any problems.
So there's a question which was, will Godot 4 have improved Android performance? It's quite open-ended, but I can just say quickly, on the rendering size, yes, because maybe Bastian can say a few words after that in a while. For the rest, so far the port is kind of like quite similar to Godot 3, but there's a lot of work being done currently by contributors, also people from Android at Google who help us improve things in the port. So there's definitely some improvements which are going to make it both to Godot 4 and to Godot 3. That might improve performance on Android, or might also improve integration in the ecosystem. So there's a lot of work being done in parallel to all the cool like rendering stuff we often talk about. There's also, yeah, a lot of love being given to the platform-specific features. And for mobile rendering, I don't know, Bastian, or Johan, if you have any insights on that.
Well, it's obviously something that we're hard at work at this point in time. So for mobile devices that are Vulkan capable and can run the Vulkan renderer, we are currently looking at where the performance bottlenecks lie and starting to look at solving those bottlenecks. So the last 2 weeks, for instance, Jean and I have been working on adding subpass support to the renderer, which allows the mobile GPU to better run through the different stages of the rendering process. This is where mobile GPUs are very different from desktop GPUs, so you have to have very different optimizations on mobile compared to desktop. Desktop in that way is much more forgiving. And like you said, we are getting help from both Google and some of the Android hardware vendors who are, testing Godot and giving us feedback on where they're finding bottlenecks and giving us recommendations on how to deal with them. Where that will end, we're pretty much still at the start of that process of optimizing this. So hopefully in a couple of weeks we'll actually have some measurements and be able to give a bit of a clue about how well things run on mobile hardware. But it is something that's at the top of our priority list.
On a completely different topic, there's maybe for Juan, or I can answer it too, but since I talk all the time, let's give the mic to others. There have been videos that claim that Godot is running out of money. How true is that? And if finances are a problem, how will it be handled?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have like at least for now money for the rest of the year, and hopefully, so we can release Godot 4. But again, Godot depends on donations, so eventually we will need to increase the donation amount so we can keep at the current pace. We are still, of course, negotiating always with companies who want to sponsor and donate and everything. We are trying also to set up a commercial asset store so you can buy and sell assets and different things and different ways that can provide more income to the project. But as always, things take time. So I hope it will be something we will publish soon. So we are working on new crowdfunding site, more like the new crowdfunding page. So we can see exactly what we are getting in donations from all sources and everything. So you can see better what is missing, what is needed for what we are using money for exactly. So that's kind of it. Not sure if Remy wants to add something to that.
Yeah, that's already quite clear. I can maybe just clarify for people, because I know there was a lot of discussion when some people made videos talking about that. It was like an interpretation of what Juan had been saying on Twitter, but like we never said that we are running out of money. It was more looking to the future, like how do we periodize what we have currently? Because to understand how Godot works, so we get donations from users on Patreon. It's quite stable, like we can predict how much we're going to get, and that can be accounted for as like, okay, that handles so many developers, that have kind of some job security, like if it doesn't disappear from one day to another. And the rest of the team are hired thanks to grants that we got from companies. So it's usually, they give us a grant for specific work or for 1 year. And there's no guarantee that they will give us another grant after that. And of course, we want to keep the people that we have hired, keep them working, because they can do work in 1 year, but then there's still a lot of work to do afterwards of maintenance and new features and stuff like that. So the things we need to work on is like renewing grants. That's some stuff we do, talking with companies, but also periodize our income so that we are not so dependent on actually securing grants, which takes a lot of time. So if we can have a more secure base income that is higher, with more sponsors, with more donations, then it's easier for us then to plan for the future. And but yeah, just to reassure everyone, like we are not in a risk of like closing shop or whatever. I mean, when we say that we need more money to sustain the current team, that means that if we don't get more money, then that just means that we will have to reduce the size of the team. So that some of the people who are currently here might not have like a super nice job security, and that kind of sucks. But for the project itself, it's not like a huge risk. It just means a setback in development speed. If we lose some part of the higher team, then the work they were doing is not going to progress as fast. So that's just what it means. But we still have enough money to keep like a strong core of people hired. Like probably people like Juan and I are not at risk of not being able to afford paying ourselves, and to some extent a lot of the rest of the team too. So that's just to mean, if we want to stay at the current level, we need to improve our funding, and eventually we might want to grow further. But our current aim is to periodize what we have now. A question from Jake Friend. Will Godot 4 natively support popping out the code editor to a separate window? I don't know who wants to answer that.
I suppose I can answer that because I made the multiple window support. Technically, it's possible. I guess I have no idea why not. Could be done. We should probably ask Paul, who is the maintainer of the code editor, eventually to do this. But yeah, it should be possible. I don't see why not.
Yeah, maybe like we already have support for creating multiple windows in Godot 4, and so there's already stuff that can be moved in theory to other windows. So far, we've gone with the objective that like for Godot 4.0, we want to have this feature but not use it too much. Just make sure that it actually works and that it can be used in projects. And then once things are stable, because currently there are still bugs, like especially on Linux, if you start using multiple windows, you can run into some problems. So we want to fix those bugs, and then we will start looking at like how can we actually use this to improve the usability of the editor? So maybe it won't be in 4.0, but maybe in 4.1 we will have that. But it's probably also not something that would be very difficult to do. So if someone wants to play a bit with it, make a proposal, try to implement something, and see how it works UX-wise, that's definitely something possible. But for now, we focus more on having the base feature ready and fix most bugs. What will the release of Windows 11 mean for Godot? I don't know, George, if you have some ideas about that.
To be honest, I haven't looked what really changed in Windows 11 besides the interface and some things. I guess the main thing that we should support is the ARM architecture for Windows, which we don't have by default. But I don't think it's gonna change a lot because it's probably super compatible, and I'm not aware of any new feature that really need to implement in Godot. And if you want something, I guess you can always open a proposal and request, okay, there's this new cool feature that will good for my game, and I want it. But as far as I'm aware, it's gonna be pretty much the same thing. We don't need to do anything, and it's just gonna work.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, it's not radically different from Windows 10. It's just renamed and with new features, but it's still the same base OS probably, and the same APIs. I think one thing that we might want to look into is how the new, how is it called, GDK, the game development kit that they release, how does that potentially supersede UWP and can be used for Xbox and stuff?
Yeah, I think the GDK cannot be used with UWP. At least that's how I understand it. So it's a bit of a different effort in that regard. But yeah, we can take a look at it and see if there's something we can use.
So, will there be a mono build for the alpha? Maybe. I'm currently working on the build system, trying to update everything. So as far as I know, mono support in the master branch is still working. There might still be some bits that need to be fixed, but at least for desktop platforms, I think it works. So we will probably have that in the alpha if I don't run into any issues with the build environment. And for the rest, I will see that soon once I start making some builds and see what breaks. But at least there will be mono support early on. I don't know if it will be in the first build, like for all platforms, but if it's not working for all platforms from the start, then it will be among the priorities to get it fixed. But there has not, just to clarify, there hasn't been like a huge breakage that would have made mono not viable in the master branch anymore. So it's like, it's just a matter of, it's one extra dependency, which is quite complex. So it can add some friction when things are changing. But there's no base incompatibility, so it will be in the alpha. If it's not in the first one, it will be in the second one. So there's a few questions about what we think about the newly announced Open 3D Engine, or some say a rebrand of Lumberyard. It's a bit early to say, but for those who haven't seen it, it's been announced yesterday. So what used to be Lumberyard has been reworked and re-released as an open source project called Open 3D Engine, a very explicit name, and backed by a lot of big companies like Amazon, Red Hat, Intel, lots of big players. So it's quite in my opinion, it's quite interesting to see such a big, I mean, I'm happy to see a proprietary engine go open source. And I'm happy to see lots of big companies, which were already, most of them, quite invested in the open source space, but not on gaming, actually come in the gaming space and say, like, open source makes sense for games too, for game development, and comes with a AAA level, at least from their communication, game engine. So it's quite interesting. Of course, we were all a bit troubled to hear about an open 3D engine and no mention whatsoever of Godot, as if we're not open and 3D. But it's just a name, and of course, from their perspective, it's a name that is convenient for marketing to say, like, if you want the open source AAA engine backed by big corporations, that's this one. And yeah, we'll see how it works once they have some public builds for different platforms. And it's Apache and MIT licensed, so it's very good licensing terms, and there's probably bits of it that can be relevant for Godot as inspiration, or even some dependencies that we might share with them. So there's various questions about how big the migration from Godot 3 to Godot 4 will be. So it's a common question that we often have in Q&As. So I'll just be brief. I can say it will be big. There's a lot of changes, but we are doing our best so that it will not be too difficult. So the advice is still, like, if you're starting a game now, use Godot 3. And then once Godot 4 is released, there will be tooling, there will be guides, and there will be what you need so that you can port your games over if you want. And if you estimate at that point that the work required is too high, then you can also stay on Godot 3, which will keep being maintained for quite a while. So simple projects will be easy to port, big projects will be difficult to port. That's kind of like, but the API, like the way you use Godot, the way the engine ticks, and is still the same. So if you're learning Godot, definitely learn Godot 3, and everything you learn will transfer to Godot 4. So I should find a question for someone else because I talk alone now. For Hugo, maybe, so many comments, or like so much of the API is undocumented. Do we have any update on the documentation coverage?
So yes, I think this question was specifically about the editor settings, because right now the editor settings aren't present in the class reference, which means that if you hover an editor setting with the mouse, you won't see any tooltip documentation, and that's not great. So I've been working on adding most editor settings to the class reference. I have a pull request for that. And also I've been studying about exposing the import option and the export preset option to the class reference. So you can also have tooltips for things like enabling the normal map inversion option, for instance, or even the option is the export dialog. So when you export to Android, you can see what each setting or permission is for by hovering it and seeing a tooltip. So I started that work, and maybe the editor settings part could be merged now, and that will help improve usability a lot.
That sounds good, yeah. And I can maybe just add that usually during, for example, Godot 3.x development, we've done like a lot of effort improving the documentation, and I encourage people to contribute to the documentation and to the class reference specifically, like trying to really raise the completion level as much as we can. currently, since we are still changing so much of the API in Godot 4, we haven't done this effort yet. We're kind of waiting for things to be more stable to really like have a focus on documentation. So once Godot reaches like late alpha or beta stage, we will start, like, core contributors are going to start writing a lot more documentation for the features that they added. And then we're also going to start asking the community at large to help us like improve the documentation coverage. So it has regressed in the master branch because we changed a lot of things. So we lost some documentation in the process, and we will have to improve things again. But for Godot 3.x, there are still improvements being done every now and then, like several times per week. So so it's progressing steadily. So Gilles, what is going on with the Godot showreel? Submissions seem to be still open while the deadline was 2 days ago.
Good question. I just haven't closed them yet, so well, take the time if today, like by the end of the stream, I'm going to remind myself about closing them. So yeah. I just didn't bother to close them yet, but yeah, we close them as soon as we start reviewing them. So.
Mm-hmm.
How many submissions we have right now?
Last time I checked, we had 300 submissions. So I guess it wasn't the question, but you understand why we needed to create a new platform to handle them, because we used to like gather submissions by email and all. So yeah, it's 300 submissions. So it's still the 300 are for both showreels. So both for the desktop and console one and the mobile one. So the 300s are split into the two, but still it's a lot of submissions. So yeah, so we're going to check them quite soon, and then we'll make the showreel.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, like, the processor shouldn't be that hard. We'll see.
Question for Hugo, maybe. What will Godot 4's application size be? At the moment, the nightly builds are almost 10 times bigger than 3.x. Will final release be that big as well?
I think there has been a little misunderstanding about this because nightly builds did become much larger since recently, but it's because I enabled debugging symbols, which allows two things. Not only it makes crash back twice useful because you will also actually see where the code crashes, which is much better for reporting bugs. And you will also be able to use profilers on those binaries, which makes performance troubleshooting easier. It makes binaries much larger, like 5-6 times larger. But once Godot 4 becomes stable enough, I will likely disable debug symbols by default in my nightly builds. It's a temporary measure because I want people to report bugs with useful crashback trace. So it's a compromise I made for now. But don't worry, official releases will be smaller than that, and we'll have all optimizations possible.
And we haven't measured yet like what the final size of Godot 4 would be like, because we haven't made an official set of like builds with the exact same optimization and size options as we do for 3.x releases. So to compare sizes, you really need to build things with the exact same options. Otherwise, you have different factors that play a role. We did add quite a few big dependencies in Godot 4, but we also added many of them in Godot 3.3. So like Godot 3.3 already grew a bit compared to 3.2. So I guess it might be up to maybe 50% bigger for the editor build, but probably not that much for the export templates. So the export template should still not be much bigger, especially for the web. But the editor build might grow a bit because there's a lot of new features. And we have plenty of ideas for later on, after Godot 4, start working on making it easier to make custom builds with features disabled. If you really want a tiny footprint, then you can disable features. For example, we added support for complex text layout, right to left languages, and all these things, and with a big dictionary who have all the relevant data to know where to split words in different languages and things like that. So that takes a lot of space, and that's needed for anyone that needs these features. But if you don't need these features, then compiling a binary without them will, of course, save a lot of space. So it's always a trade-off between supporting things and then removing everything that you don't need for a specific game if you want a smaller binary. George, can we expect a big bug fix phase for GDScript's new setup before 4.0 goes beta?
Yes, I guess that's the answer. But if you know a bug in GDScript that was not reported yet, so please report. So when it gets to that time, when I get your bug fix, I can see that and fix that. So that's pretty much it.
Will the performance in engine of Godot 4 improve? Currently, I have found it to be too slow. That's true. There are some bugs that we are aware of, which make things much slower now in the editor, but that's bugs and they will be fixed. From an architecture point of view, it should be faster, but the fact that it's not is because we have bugs to fix. But yeah, we have all noticed slowness of the editor, which is tracked in several issues, and that will be fixed hopefully before the first alpha, because it's kind of a showstopper when the inspector takes 5 seconds to update when you try to view a complex object. That's kind of annoying. But that's well profiled already, so it will be fixed eventually. Would you accept backward breaking changes to the tree control node for 4.0? I feel the naming of some of the functions could be improved to be more intuitive. Juan and Gilles were talking about that recently, so.
Well, I mean, in general, yes. We do accept compatibility breaking changes, mainly because we set up a way to keep the old names still compatible, if I'm not mistaken. So all changes in the API are stored somewhere, unless I'm mistaken. So
only for class names.
Okay.
So not for methods. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we do accept that anyway, because 4.0 is here for that. So we even have a big tracker where we have all compatibility breaking API changes. So yeah, it's kind of now never, more or less, or in a later big API breaking changes. But
so yeah, I think these kind of changes, the best is to make a proposal on the Godot proposals repository, and then come discuss it on the Godot chat. So you can post a link to the proposal and ask people for feedback. So we can validate the idea. Like if it's just renaming methods to be more explicit, that's probably going to be easy to validate. If it's a bigger refactor, that can also be useful, because the tree class we were discussing is probably one of the hackiest ones that grew organically for the needs of the editor as like a big complex class that could use a refactor, but at the same time refactoring that is quite difficult because there's a lot of code that depends on it. But yeah, both types of proposals can be interesting to discuss. So are there any changes being made or thought of for plugin developers in Godot 4? I don't know who wants to answer that.
I guess George.
So plugins, honestly, plugins is something I haven't looked at much recently. And as far as I know, the API for plugins is about the same, but of course everything else has changed. So the whole editor is there's a lot of things changing in the editor and the API in general. So I think for the plugin structure, it's probably the same, but you have to rewrite everything or a lot of things to make it compatible again, just because of the like any script we have to change.
But yeah, I think there are quite a few proposals on improving things. I'm not sure many of them will be tackled before Godot 4.0 because like the more features we try to do, the more we delay the release. So we try to do the things which really need breaking compatibility, but for plugins, the current API is kind of like workable. What's missing is maybe to expose more of the editor to the plugins. So have more ways to access bits of the editor so that your plugins can act on them. But that can be added in Godot 4.1 or 4.2, like after discussion and without breaking compatibility. So it's not our focus currently because we want to have everything else working first. An ETA on 3.4 release candidate. So as I was saying, I'm working on that now, updating the build system to start making builds for 3.4. I'm waiting for a few pull requests, like with new features to be merged. Especially, Lone Jelly has been working on portals and rooms system that can be used as a technique for occlusion culling, like where you can say like this is a room, here's how you go from one room to another, and you can optimize your rendering this way. So it's ready. It just needs a final review before merging, but that should be in the first beta for 3.4. And the question was specifically about getting access to some fixes made for iOS C#, and that's part of what I'm working on now to make sure that I actually get the relevant build system changes right, so that I can build that properly and make sure that that it works, which is tricky because I don't have any Mac or iOS device, so it's always interesting to work on these kind of things without having access to the hardware. So I should refresh to see newer questions, I think. So there were a few questions for Juan about when will you do the next parts of your video source code explanations, which seem to be very popular.
I hope after the alpha, if after the alpha, I guess also the code base will be a bit more stable. Okay, this is the final form. So if I want to explain the code base, going to be something more like, okay, this is not going to change so much, which is why I stopped doing it last year. But yeah, I guess hopefully by then that will be the time.
Any plans to release the new tile system to Godot 3 as well? I can already say no. It's too complex and requires breaking compatibility, so it would break all Godot 3 tile maps. Is it possible to add auto launch on an iOS device just like it is done for Android? It's quite tricky because, first of all, you need to be on a Mac to be able to export to iOS, and you need to use Xcode. So there's no like, for Android, we can export. We already have the APK, which is pre-built, and we can just inject your game data in it and sideload that on the device. So that's really convenient. But we're actually also moving a bit away from that and now using the Android SDK to actually compile an APK based on the Godot source template of precompiled source code and libraries. So for iOS, there's probably ways to automatize a bit the system, but it needs someone who is really interested in it. And from the core devs, we don't have a lot of people really interested in that. So we kind of rely on external contributions to see what's possible. I remember that a few years ago, someone looked at improving one-click deploy for iOS using some libraries. So there might be ways to do things, but it needs to be researched. But I think we cannot bypass anyway the fact that you have to be on a Mac and use Xcode to compile the final archive before sending it to the device. So will the 2.x branch still be supported after Godot 4 gets released? That's a good question. It's actually like not very actively supported already now. It's still open. Like if there's a need, I can still merge some fixes, but it has a very limited number of users. So we spend our work time on what's like most useful to the community. So if the community doesn't need an update, then we don't work on it. And it's actually starting to become quite difficult now to update the 2.1 branch because it's so old. And some of the updates which might be useful would be updates to match requirements of Google Play and of the Apple Store. And for that, there's quite a significant amount of work that would need to be backported. So it would have to be done by someone who really has an interest in it, like who has games that they need to update and knowledge about the platforms and could backport all the relevant changes from Godot 3.x. And then yeah, I'm happy to work on making a release. But yeah, now the Godot 2 branch is really on a best effort, maintained on a best effort basis. Fabio, will WebRTC be supported on Android in Godot 4?
Yes. Actually, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've recently released. I will make a blog post about it soonish. But I released a new version of the plugin that already works in using Godot 3.2 or Godot 3.3 on Android with WebRTC. You need the plugin as always, and I plan to have the same support in 4.0 that we had that we have right now in 3.3. So there will be definitely.
So there's several questions about the release date for Godot 4. I cannot answer that. Let's first have an alpha, and then we will see how it goes from there. Will there be any difference in terms of stability between the nightly builds and the first alpha for 4.0? That's a good question. There should be, yes, because the fact that we haven't published an alpha yet is because there are still too many cases where the engine is either too slow or crashes. So that's like we made a dashboard of the biggest issues which we want to fix before the first alpha, and those are crashes and slowness of the editor. So once this is fixed, then we will have an alpha which should be, I mean, it will still be an alpha. That means not production ready. It can still crash. It can still make your computer crash. So be warned that it's still experimental software, but it should be less buggy than the current nightly builds. There's some questions where I don't know how to answer them, like, will there be a focus also on 3D to match up with existing 2D functionalities? I mean, there's been focus on 3D now for 1.5 years on rendering. It's an interesting question because it's also a misconception that we see often in the community of like Godot has awesome 2D features and not awesome 3D features, but we don't always talk about the same things. Like there's features in rendering, there's features in usability, in like what kind of convenience things you have available. So currently we're working on making the Godot rendering and the usability of the editor much better for Godot 4 and 3D. Then that opens the way for a lot more. So if there's more important features that are missing in 3D, they will be implemented after that. But it doesn't have to be like a 1-1 match between 2D and 3D because 2D and 3D games don't need the same features. So it's not always the same. Sorry, I'm sorting through questions, trying to find some that we haven't answered yet. So there's several questions about the commercial asset library, whether people will be able to sell like textures and assets and like not Godot specific things, but just general game dev stuff. I guess yes, it's already possible on the asset library currently to upload like texture packs and stuff, but on the paid one, it's probably going to be part of what is offered. We will probably just have a better way to categorize things so that you know, like, okay, I'm searching for Godot plugin or I'm searching for assets, like general engine agnostic assets, which have been prepared for Godot, but which is just content for your game and not tools or gameplay scripts. Gilles, there's a few questions about Git support. I know you've been working together with a student working on the plugin. Yeah, there's different questions, but I don't know. What do you know about what's the current status of the plugin and what are future plans for like Git support in the engine?
So there's what's been worked on right now. We're going to have so there's two things. The editor is going to have an API, an agnostic API. In terms of like you will be able to plug in different kind of version control software like Git, but we also plan to support I think Perforce and things like that. I mean, not specifically us, but at least you should be able to create a plugin for that. So right now the Git plugin, I think it is waiting for the last changes on GD native that are required for the plugin to be adopted and work for 4.0. For now, it kind of only supports like managing the files that are changed, things like that. So you only have the list of deleted file, modified file, and added file. But the most difficult part of this is being able to manage the difference between two files. And this is something we're not ready yet to support in the engine. So you cannot like solve merge conflict and things like that. So the support for Git is kind of rough for now, but yeah, at least you should be able to simply say, okay, all those changes I made, just push them and create a commit. This is something we'd like to have for Godot 4. You only have to install the Git plugin for that, and it should work.
So there's a few questions about the changes to GD native or the new extension system. So maybe George and Juan, you can say a bit more about it. Like, what will it be like? What's the change, and what does it imply in terms of language support?
So the extension systems is it's kind of hard to explain, but what changes mostly is that when you add like a new extension, is not really a script. Like on GD native, you have native script, which is really just a script attached to a node or something. But on the new system is not that. It just appears as a regular class, like it was an engine class in a way, and you can also attach a new script to that class if you want to. And for languages that are especially like compiled in languages like C++ or Rust or something, that's really good because you can essentially extend the engine without having to deal with scripts. Because on the current one, you have to create a GDNS file, which is just a wrapper to say, okay, it needs to be a file because the resource is a file, but it doesn't contain really any information besides the name of the class and the library that you're connecting. And that's kind of pain in the ass to have one of those two for each class that you need to do. And so that's gonna be solved essentially. You only need one file for the library to say, okay, this is the shared library, this is the DLL that I want to use. And the classes all appear on the engine like they were. If you add a new node, the node will be there, or a resource, the resource will be there. And you can also use in GScript, you can extend the class and everything. So for other kind of languages like Python support is gonna be a bit different because it makes more sense to have those as scripts. So it kind of have an extra support to add an extension, use the extension to now add a new scripting language, something that we need to see how exactly it's gonna work. But yeah, that's the main difference, I guess.
Question for Juan. Will Godot 4 ship an AAA example like the third-person shooter demo?
Well, we are working now with many community members in creating like high quality demo content for Godot 4, for Godot 4, sorry. I'm so still too early in the morning for Godot 4. So the idea is that one of them is being worked by the same person who made the TPS demo. It's a new 3D, you could say platformer or something like that demo, where you can like fight enemies and do combos and these kind of things. Some of the artwork for that is done. It has to be integrated. The past 2 or 3 days, I was trying to integrate all the new content, but the engine is super buggy. So I've been basically fixing bugs and will continue fixing bugs the next days. This is really cool because at least I can make sure that I can test all the new workflows like with a huge amount of content. Like this demo is huge. You have no idea how much it has in terms of models, textures. It's really, really big. So trying to get the scene and the character scene and everything is kind of challenging and helping like fix all the workflow and all the bugs. And it's even funny because we actually work with the people from Blender working on the GLTF2 exporter, because the idea is to use the GLTF2 exporter because we want to entirely rely like on open standards. So it also requires fixing stuff on the Blender GLTF2 exporter. So now everything is kind of falling into place and we can try to make this. But still working on fixing quite amount of bugs and everything. So yeah, it's going to have that. We're also working on a few other demos. maybe Hugo can tell more about it. We are working on converting one of the. I will let Hugo talk because I'm not sure exactly how it's called.
So yes, I've been doing work in parallel with Juan to create a second 3D demo for Godot 4. It's based on the CM Valley demo scene that I showed last year and Juan also showed while testing SDFGI, Global Illumination. And the goal is to modernize the demo, create modern PBR materials for it, and also find or create better meshes for interiors and vegetation. So we can have something that is really large scale because there's a lot of things to explore in Sim Valley. It's pretty large, but yet we will try to make it more detailed and make use of the LOD system to improve performance. So unlike most demos we've created so far, Sim Valley has a much larger scale. It's almost something you could call open world, yet it still has a good level of detail. And I think it will be great to see in action in Godot 4. It will also have things like a day-night cycle and stuff like that, since Godot 4 also has a physical sky system we can use for that.
So there's a question on what are the the Google Summer of Code projects which are being worked on. So I was busy and I haven't asked the students yet to make, like, normally we make a post when they start working to introduce the different projects, but they already started working 1 month ago. So I will ask them soon to make a first progress report and then use the opportunity to present their projects more in detail. But I can tell you already the projects that we have, which are being worked on. So we have a project on adding support for pseudo localization, which is a technique to change the strings of your project to make them like bigger and use like all kinds of diacritics and accented characters and special characters that look like English characters or Latin letters. So they can, so it's still readable, but it challenges your UI basically. It's to make sure that even if the content is bigger once translated or using some characters that might not be in your font, then you can see that it's actually going to work and fit in the UI in every single place. There's another feature which is being worked on, which is the auto rearrangement of nodes in GraphEdit, which will benefit Visual Script and Visual Shaders, so that you can, like, if you've made a big script with lots of noodles and it goes in all kinds of directions, then there will be an easy feature to tidy everything and make things like well organized. There's improvements being worked on for the soft body dynamics in the physics backend. And there's a DAP backend for debugging Godot project. I think that stands for Debugger Adapter Protocol. So it's basically to connect to other debuggers, I think, and debug your Godot projects.
It allows an external IDE, like any IDE potentially supporting that protocol, to use the Godot editor as a debugger. So you can program with the external editor, which is already a feature in Godot. And then from the external editor, you will be able to press run in that external editor, and it will call the Godot editor, run the game, and you will be able to debug it using the tools from your IDE. Which will go through the Godot editor, but you won't have to open it. You will have to have it open, but you don't have to use it actually, basically.
It's the equivalent of LSP, the language server protocol, but for debugging.
Yeah, exactly.
And setting breakpoints and all that jazz.
And the last one is work on a command palette. So it lets you access, like, search basically all kinds of actions that you can make in the editor by text and apply them, like you can find in other IDEs like VS Code and stuff like that. I think, at least if I understood correctly. But yeah, we will soon have a blog post about that and with insights in what students have already implemented and how you can test it. So there's a question on whether the camera server will work on Windows and Linux anytime soon.
Maybe I can answer that.
Yeah.
So we have contributors who have been working on adding support for camera server on both Windows and Linux. On Linux, it uses the Video for Linux 2 API, which is kind of the universal API for using webcams on Linux. Software like OBS uses that, for example. And on Windows, I think we are using Media Foundation, which is a Windows API for using webcams on Windows. So I am not sure if this will be finished in time for 4.0, but we will try to do our best to review and merge this work.
And there's a question on what's the current plan for re-implementing vsync for Godot 4? Will it be available before the alpha release? There's already a pull request that implements it. It's pending review, so hopefully it will be merged before the alpha.
Yeah, also to note that this vsync pull request also adds support for adaptive vsync. So you can now use a kind of vsync that is only active when your frame rate is above the monitor refresh rate. And when your frame rate dips below that, it will automatically disable itself to avoid stuttering.
So there was a few questions about GLES2, GLES3 in Godot 4, like usual. So just as a reminder, currently there's only Vulkan support implemented in Godot 4, and the current plan is to implement GLES3 for both 2D and 3D, but in like a version targeted towards lower end devices, so it should work better than the GLES3 in Godot 3, which was targeted at high end and would therefore not work so well on Android and iOS and the web. But it hasn't been implemented yet, so that's kind of the joker of the 4.0 release. That's the plan, but yeah, it will be implemented once other things have fallen in place. I don't know, Juan, if you have a clear idea about that.
So yeah, the idea is to implement GLES3 in Godot 4, but the idea is to finish at least all the API changes and get the Vulkan renderer as stable as possible. So we know that the API we are using is going to be like that one. And once it's tested and we know all the bugs that are fixed in the Vulkan renderer and it's stable and it runs fast and everything, then the idea is to maybe take a month and backport GLES3 to Godot 4. But the idea is to first, at least this will probably be done in the very late betas or something like that, much closer to release time. And if we really run out of time, it will have to be done for Godot 4.1. So I hope not. But yeah, the idea is to do it once we know that the renderer in Vulkan is super stable and the API is final and everything is exactly what we want to do and everything. So yeah, that's kind of the general idea.
For Bastian, is there any progress on OpenXR to support WMP? Do you know what that stands for? Windows Media Platform, I guess.
I don't know WMP. I guess WMR, Windows Mixed Reality. Not directly in the sense that that nobody currently is focusing on it. The biggest problem that we have is that the OpenXR runtime that Windows has made or Microsoft has made is a DirectX only runtime. And obviously, Godot being an OpenGL/Vulkan game engine, that's a bit of a problem. Now the UWP build of Godot obviously uses Angle. If you look at Godot 3, uses Angle in order to have it run on DirectX. In theory, it should be possible to compile the OpenXR plugin to tie into that. There's a couple of changes that need to be done in the core to expose some of the DirectX service information so that the OpenXR plugin can pick that up. And in theory, the Universal Windows Platform build should be able to use it then. And it's something that I've been wanting to spend time on for a while now. I just haven't found the time. And if someone else has the time, that would be cool. And I'd gladly help them along. And else, hopefully at some point I will get round to it. Which also reminds me that one of the things obviously that's open right now is the version of Angle that we're using is quite old. I think there's a pull request using the new Google Angle one, the one that Google maintains. So that's something worth looking into and seeing if that's what we need to tie into to make it all work. So yeah, there's a couple of unknowns there, but in theory it should be able to be doable. It's just a matter of finding the time to actually do it.
There was a question earlier about if we could add some documentation on how to make a custom platform port, to create support for new platforms. I guess we could. The best documentation we have for that is the existing platform code. So in the platform folder, you have a specific folder for each platform. And inside, you can see basically the few bits which have to be implemented for platform-specific support. Everything else is just shared among all platforms. So it's actually fairly easy to add platform support, but we could probably add a documentation page that documents this, in the general broad strokes, that you have to implement platform-specific implementation for the display server, for the OS, and for input, and that's kind of it, and for the export workflow. So yeah, that could be documented. Are you going to hire more members soon? Not really. We have a couple short-term work packages that we've been discussing, but we don't plan to have a long-term hire right now, at least. As we were saying earlier, we need to focus on making sure that we have a stable income for the current team for the years to come. And then once we're somewhat confident about this, we can start growing the team again to work on more areas faster. Juan, maybe, will it be possible to create custom servers with the new GD extension system? So I guess physics or rendering servers.
Yeah, that's the idea, pretty much. The idea is that you should be able to override things in the engine at lower level. One of the problems you have with GD native is that you would do C++ code, but it would just be a script. You didn't have pretty much access to anything, and you couldn't override anything in the low level. So the idea of the new extension system is that it will have different initialization levels. So it will ask you if you want to initialize something core, if you want to initialize servers, or if you just want to initialize scene or editor plugins. So if you want to initialize something like a server and you install this extension, the editor is going to ask you to restart because it needs to restart, of course, see the new server. But if you just put something like an editor extension, it doesn't need to. So in general, the idea is that you should be able to override absolutely everything with the new extension system as an external piece of code. So you will be able to make like a new render, a new physics server, or anything you want with that. That's one of the main reasons why we did this change.
What is your opinion on supporting external texture compression tools when exporting projects? I guess that's for Juan.
I think we supported that at some point. I'm not sure what the status of is, but in general in Godot, what you do is you compress when you import rather when you export, or because it's just faster in general, because every time you want to test your game on device, it's much faster if it was pre-compressed when imported. So yeah, I suppose we could do that eventually. If you really need to support this, at least for importing, we could make it so you can override it. Right now it's modular, but it's not exposed to Snater alone. So maybe just open a proposal and explain how you would like to use it or something like that, and that may work well.
Wait. I want to remind about texture compression support. I just realized this now, but Godot already allows you to load DDS files, which can be VRAM compressed. You can even have custom emaps in them, so you could use an offline tool like NVIDIA Texture Tools to create those DDS files and load them in Godot. So they will be directly compressed in advance. So if you really need custom compression, you can do that. I think that feature is still in Godot 4. I need to test, but I'm not sure. But it is in Godot 3.x at least.
Will there be a way to create node groups in Visual Script and Visual Shader editors? I think...
Don't we have that already?
Yeah, I think there was a Google Summer of Code project on that last year, no? That is being in is good work, which is still in the process of being reviewed. It's being undergoing a slow review, but I think that's a feature that has been implemented and that will be merged hopefully in time for Godot 4. And there's more improvements to Visual Script arrangement of nodes, as we were saying. So groups and auto arrangements that should make the spatial workflow a lot nicer. So we're getting close to 1.5 hours, so I guess we'll end soon. We can end with a question from Patreon, which is, what was your favorite talk given at GodotCon? So maybe we can have a quick round to just say quickly what we liked, even though we are enough people that we kind of have one person per talk, so we might have some overlap. But I'll start then. I'm not overlapping with anyone. I really enjoyed the talk by Ilaria on visual effects, where she showed like various basic concepts for how to think and conceive visual effects, also from like an artistic perspective, so which I found quite interesting, and I'm itching to give it a try and try to do some VFX stuff myself. And for those who are interested in visual effects, by the way, there is a Discord server dedicated to making visual effects with Godot, where they often have some informal competitions or some like a good feeling of emulation where they do stuff together. I don't know, Juan, did you watch any talk?
Yeah. So yeah, I want to say I also enjoyed a lot Ilaria's talk. To me, even if I make the engine and the rendering, seeing the creativity that people put on VFX to make effects, to me it's amazing, because I just see the VFX and I think like, how did they even do that? I mean, I wrote the renderer, but I don't know how they did that. So just looking at the way they creatively used everything available to make something look amazing to me is just mind blowing. So that was my favorite talk.
George?
It's hard to choose a favorite, but as a language nerd, I found interesting the one about the animation trees with closure, like using a language to make a graph. I found that's very interesting idea.
Joan? You edited all the talks until 4 a.m. Which one was your favorite?
I will say the first one, just because it was missing 30 seconds in the end because of me, so I will say this one. Sorry about that.
Hugo?
Well, obviously my favorite talk is a talk about the decal node, because you can do anything at all with the decal node.
I would have been surprised if it wasn't this one.
And what about you, Gilles?
I actually liked the one from Kalinus. The one Ilaria's talk was really great too. Must watch. There's the last one I wanted to talk about. Yeah, the flash talk by GD Quest. Quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Fabio?
Yeah, I will go with Ilaria's one too. Also, I mean, I'm not an artist, and that's the real amazing part, right? Like that's where the magic of video games happen, when you do particles and effects. So I'm gonna go with that. And I agree, the one from Nathan was from GD Quest was really, really insightful. And I also, having done some teaching to kids, I totally relate to the things that were said and the problems and what's the best way to approach them. So.
And Bastian?
Well, first of all, I was obviously sleeping through most of GodotCon, seeing the hours of the day that it was for me. From the ones that I've managed to catch up on, I'm also Ilaria's one is at the top of my list. I really enjoyed that one, and it just shows you what you can do if you just combine the capabilities of Godot with just a very good artistic insight. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was really well done.
Great. Then I think we'll end here for today, and we'll see you next time. Probably, like initially we were making Q&As on a monthly basis, and then lately it's been more like every other month. And I find this works quite well, because otherwise we have a lot of repeats every month. So the next one might then be like maybe late August. We're a bit late for this one. It should have been late June. So at the end of August, or yeah, we'll see. Actually, I'm not available at the end of August, but maybe I will not be there. And hopefully, yeah, this next time we can talk about Godot 4.0 alpha and the first feedback from users if we've managed to release something. So thanks everyone for joining and for all your questions. And if you had a burning question that we did not get to answer live, then feel free to ask us on other community platforms, on Twitter or any other platform where we're active. Goodbye. Have a nice day.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.